things are going to happen in the future. You're going to walk into the room and it's going to do this for you and it's going to do that for you. All sorts of other amazing things that we think are kind of magical today. And one of the things that we've done is to try to look at some of those things that we think of as magic and say, well, they're not always magic. Some of them are really real. All right, and I'm going to walk through just a few of those technologies today, start to show you what they enable and how they will change. And in that sense, a couple of themes that I hope we walk away from today is that one is we need to take a much longer term view of technology in terms of how we think about it and how we plan for it and how we anticipate it's going to change the institution. And the way I describe that is that to the extent that we're looking ahead and worried about the next upgrade to Blackboard, we're in the wrong ballpark in a completely wrong universe. We need to be looking 5 to 7 years ahead and understanding what's really coming and what some of those real, not just transformational things are going to be, but really highly disruptive technologies and how we should be preparing for them. The last piece, which will come out here, I'm not going to deal with it, but you'll see, and I expect questions when we get there, is that part of that is these future technologies are bring up a whole new world of privacy issues and things that we talk about today, but I hope some of the things you see today will cause you to think about some of those things in a different way. All right, so let me jump in. 21st century student experience, start with a question. And the question is, how will technology affect the 21st century student experience? And student, staff, and pieces here. And the answer in a nutshell is it's going to really, really change. And in that case, like the quick bottom, no, I mean really going to change things. All right. So imagine, if you will, a campus with smart places that proactively adapt to your presence, needs, activities, and preferences. All right. Students have perfect recall, lifelong memory, and portfolios of every academic experience. All right. Yeah. All right. I told you I'm going to be provocative here. Teachers can access, review, and analyze their students' entire academic experience. Lifelong learning is built into every student activity. Just for a few things to kind of start about things that are transformational and also potentially very disruptive. So what do you do to kind of start to look at that to say, well, that's a great vision. How do we kind of start to make it real? And part of that is just to think at a very high level, first of all, about what kind of model environment is this going to be in the future in technology. And the simplest view, kind of notion, all right, is that individuals will be connected to pervasive networks all the time, and they will kind of, in that sense, have a halo of services that are always with them and always following them and always delivering services to them in a much smarter way. You know, there'll be intelligent services to know where you are and what you're doing and what you're most likely to want. And just a world of services here. And these aren't really services, these are different technologies to start to make that happen. So that's the general concept. Before which you've got this little halo that goes around. Some of the technologies to start to make that happen is there's lots and lots of them. I like this one upon the best way to have a good idea is have lots of them. Well, there are lots and lots of new technologies that are just kind of starting to come online, and pieces that are going to have individually quite an impact on what we do and how we do it. But the other piece here is that when these things like agent-based computing or digital memories start to overlap in other pieces, this is where magical things really start to happen, or things that we would think of today as being very magical. So I'm going to just talk about a few things and then jump in and do some demos and then have lots of time here. Part of that kind of vision, I think this is not Mark Weiser, all right, but I think that this quote captures some of the things really that are one concept that's really important, and that is that now we're in this personal computing area where the person and the machine are staring uneasily at each other across the desktop. You know, and while we think of these things as being very smart, they're actually, we are tethered to them as much as they are tethered to us. And in reality, we have to tell them everything to do. You know, print this, write that, go calculate this, and everything else. As opposed to something that's going to be much more pervasive and much more smarter. That's kind of a fundamental change in the environment that's going to start seeing more and more. This is a picture of a guy with an orb, and I just use this as a little example to say, this is an example of how technologies will become much more pervasive and start to disappear in your environment. We have some applications running that use this orb. It's got a number of LEDs in it, and you can control what those LEDs do, which is really a very simple thing. But now you can take that through some of these new technologies and integrate it into the environment in a way that's totally new. So we have a number of applications right now where this goes out and looks at your calendar and does things for you based on your calendar. Well, it doesn't really do things. It gives you certain warnings and notices, and you can set it to do what you want. And you know, it could count down or blink or change colors or do whatever you want depending on what's going on and type of a thing. So it's kind of a new wave piece. And I don't think of it as an orb per se. The real notion to think about this is that it's just an example of how technology starts to be part of your entire environment. And this goes back to ubiquitous, it's about the halo you're around. Now, one other technology here to talk about is context awareness. Context awareness is the who, what, when, where, why around you. There are technologies that help support context awareness, and with that and a new world of sensor networks. People know what I mean when I say sensor networks? Well, let me just say a quick comment. And the idea is that whether it's RFID or anything like that all those devices will be networked in the future. One of the ways to really think about that differently is to say, today, only 5% of the CPUs in the world are in computers. So the question is, where's the other 95%? The answer is they're embedded chips. And one of the technical changes that's coming and already started, but will be just gain momentum over time, is the fact that all those other CPUs are going to start talking to each other. And that's what we start to think of as a massive sensor network. You know, the table can start to think about talking to the chair, and even without a CPU and stuff. So it's much different. Now, this is an application, I'm going to show you this application, but this is an application that starts to use context awareness and other things and some smart environments to start to do things for you and provide services that are kind of, well, that are new. In this case, what this example is showing you is that this, we call this, by the way, a context browser. It's an interface for you to see your context and to control your context and learn things about the environment and such. And in this case, it's showing you, and this is just a slide, who you're with in your vicinity. It's showing you the things that it has discovered in your vicinity. Meaning this is not hardwired, this is just an interactive piece with some agent technology and smart background processing to say, oh, I walked in this room and here's what I found. You know, my agent out there in the ether, so to speak. And then in this case, this is just a thing about friends elsewhere. And what we did was we implemented a FOV directory and added some intelligence to it through agent technology and context awareness so that we could start to know. That was an example that was very easy about friends. It's kind of a more sophisticated version of Facebook. All right, and I'll show you some demos.
What are the numbers under, I guess, the phone?
Oh, thank you.
Bottom, 3, 2,
Yeah,
1.
these and these. This is part of the FOF, and it was just a first hack to say one was a first order. So Michael and John are direct friends. This would be a friend of a friend, and this would be a friend of a friend of a friend. Okay? And it's just one of hundreds of things. It could be, the idea here was to demonstrate that that could be anything. It doesn't have to be friends. It could be telling you something about courses or classes or majors, or, you know, it's kind of infinite in terms of what it can start to do. We just implemented this with friends because I think people get that immediately. Oh, it's friend to friend, that type of stuff. And part of all these things we're starting to say is that in this world, you can reach out and touch everything, and it's not just that you discover it automatically, but you actually have control of it, and you actually have, through context awareness and other intelligent agents, the ability to proactively go out and touch them and change them and modify them, depending on your personal preferences and other learning that goes on about what you like. This, just as a side note, is some of the new sensor and wireless technology. That's a quarter. It's not a very good picture. And these are getting smaller. And basically that's a part of a mesh network transmitter with, and I forget what sensors this has on it, but it's got a temperature and an infrared and a few things on it. But these things can talk to each other, you know, 50 yards away and vice versa. So you imagine if they have in here, you know, a thermostat can talk to this and talk to that and all sorts of things, and control everything. So that's just a little bit about context awareness: who, what, when, where, why, and introducing. In this case, it's showing you those things. I'm not going to talk about how it did that. Memory augmentation. This is a project that Jane and I have been doing, and I think it's really cool. How many people know about Vannevar Bush mnemonics? All right, cool. Then I won't say anything more about that, other than the fact that it's a little, if you haven't actually read the original article, part of the thing about collecting data was, which is one of my favorites, is, you know, this is 55 years ago now, 60 years ago, 45. So anyway, 60 years ago, he was going to capture information about your environment. So you were wearing something like a football helmet with a camera on top, with a long wire that came down your sleeve. And whenever you saw something you wanted to remember, you were supposed to click it. And I thought that was actually a very novel idea. Obviously today those things can be done, no hat, no nothing. You can have it in your side clip and do all that automatically. So the point is, it's starting to become viable. In this case, what one of the things that Jane and I got together on was a project from this was an application, a research project from Microsoft Research Labs, where they were building and experimenting with a personal mimics that would collect all sorts of things automatically for you. And I'm not going to go into details, but the idea is that you could start to ask it questions like, what happened at 3 p.m. last Tuesday? You know, find the articles by Jane, you know, things like that. Because it would have your whole life there recorded. And we could talk about visions and potential impacts of that. But in a nutshell, what we did with Jane was we said, well, this old stuff, just taking all this information and throwing it in a great big database and then searching it is one thing. What we really want to do is add context awareness from that, or context metadata that says not just this is what happened at 3 p.m., but now take the context awareness that's going on the side and say, I was in this room and I was listening to Oberlin, or I was taking a Chemistry 101 exam and tagging it. So now you can go back and ask more interesting questions. Show me everything from Chem 101 that had to do with cyclopropanone. And it could go back and find that for you. Show me the first time I was together with Bob and Sally at the library. All right, because of the context data, you can do that. You'll know you're having a meeting and things like that. You'll know from the context being deduced that you're going to have, you're with your study group and things like that. So you can have not only do you have this wealth of information that accumulates over a lifetime, but you can now start to envision this as what I call next generation e-portfolio, you know, where you really have your academic portfolio.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, go ahead. Jane, why don't
Deb
you,
and Abe, and is Errol here?
why don't you guys raise your hands that are working with Jane?
People are very much part of the project.
Yeah, I didn't mean to
It's okay.
pass over folks. But it's a fun project. I hope Jane can talk about it more. I'm going over just very quickly here a little bit at a high level conceptual. And the piece was, in a nutshell, what we were doing on the research side was how do you take it and tag it with context? How do you deduce the context, and how do you put the context into the mimics and then enable new things, context-based metadata. My personal favorite was, what was that article I was reading last month during the Carolina game? It's like, I don't know about you, but one of my favorite examples is, gosh, I read that, but what was it? You know I was at home or I was in my office, it was after dark, and it was raining, but today that doesn't help me. In a mimics world, that's all you need. You can go back and get that. This is a quick view of a couple of technologies, and the piece I want to emphasize here is we need to take a much longer, more futuristic view of the future. Things like this, and this is just a small piece of things that are coming, will have profound impacts on us and our students and everything about the institution. And in that sense, one of the things is I like this is an invasion of armies can be resisted, but an ideas whose time has come can't be. And many of these ideas are coming. It's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And they are going to really transform the way we think about computing and what's possible. So one of the things I'm trying to do is, as I look across the university, start to engage people, say, okay, how can we start to take some of these and apply them in a real living lab type of environment so we can gain a first-hand appreciation of them. And in that sense, start to provide what I call one of the, at a very high level, develop an early warning system. MEMICS is, as you know, is full of policy ideas and privacy. The classic example of privacy and ownership is if you're getting divorced, can your husband subpoena your mimics? Okay. So that's just scratching the surface of all the privacy and policy issues involved. In principle, your mimics will be recording everything we do here, and I'd have everything recorded, and it would also be making a transcript for me in the back. So the point is, we need an early warning system to start identifying, not resolving the policy issues, but just to identify the policy issues. With this, let me now shift away from talking at you and actually do something. And in this case, I'm going to go back and start an application, which is what we call the context browser. And this tab up here says it's live context. So this is really running through a very complex environment where there really is a context-aware framework out there that's running live. There's a set of sensors out there that are collecting it and updating it and such. Okay. Now, part of it is obviously not going to be real in the sense that we don't have an environment here that can sense me and know what I'm doing or anything else. But I'll start to demonstrate how that actually works and some of the things that we have working in a lab that might make a really neat living lab in some other place to look at. And so let me log in here. All right. This is a view of my context, and it's obviously not completely accurate because it's showing me now, in this case, it's being in Abernathy room 102. All right, so that part, my tag, so to speak, is sitting back in Abernathy, and we've tweaked the data to account for the fact that this room isn't smart enough to know I'm here. In this case, like I said before, this is showing me back in Abernathy who else is with me, in which case in room 102 Willie would be with me. It's showing the things that it discovered in room 102. There's an AMX in there and a video display. It's also given me an option to take some micro views, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And then it's showing me my friends who are someplace else. Right? Now, a couple things about this. If I'm in the room with Willie, I can click on Willie, and it'll go out and tell me his context. And this is just a very, very sample type of idea of the types of things you could display and provide. Okay? And so it knows its location, it knows its coordinates. It's gone out and found his home page. It's got his agent here, which is his agent running in the piece. And that's not important for us as a user, but it's really important from a technical perspective. But it could be anything else. I mean, you could be farming information from his agent if he gave you permission to do almost anything here. Estimated distance away, from me, and these are just, again, examples. It's gone out and found a blog feed. Oh, and it's got his SIP number, voice over IP SIP. And in that case, you could click on his SIP number and go directly to him, and it would go through the context and talk to his agent before making the call, so that you have this idea of presence. I mean, people know about presence, but this takes presence to a whole nother level, because it not only, your presence is not just where I am, but it might be what's on my calendar. I don't have to tell it I'm in a meeting. It's smart enough to go out and check my calendar and know that I'm in a meeting or I'm in a class, and it's not going to answer. It's not going to let the call go through, or it'll automatically send it to that person's voicemail or something. Now, here's another example of how we can take some of this information and do something. This is a much smarter room, and it has a variety of sensors in it. What it's showing me, what it's showing all of us right now, is that the room has sensed that I'm sitting up here at the head of the table, and Willie happens to be sitting next to me. All right? Because Willie and I are friends, or because we've chosen to, we've decided to share context information of various sorts with each other. All right, so I could click on Willie and, over here, this is why the piece, and learn about him. If I hadn't, or I might only limit it to certain things, you can get different types of context. So imagine here for just a second, not only do you know who's in the room, but now you can start to know about them, and you can start to know almost anything you want. And that's one of the big challenges, is that if this was a classroom or a seminar environment, what do you really want to know? How can you use this and start to have a enhanced electronic learning community to build connections and such? And I could talk about that a lot, but the idea here is that the Friends Elsewhere is just an example. Imagine now, and we are in the process of implementing this, that instead of friends, you had Chemistry 101 and a list of all the folks in there, and you could decide what you're going to share with, but now you could have a whole new set of electronic connections, whether you're going to be study groups or meeting or different pieces, or you might be able to find out, should you choose to, and should people choose to share it, what major they are, or other interests that you have in common, or things that might be more relevant to hopefully more relevant to the class. And that's one of the challenges, to say, okay, if you're building this learning community and have that, what would those things that you want to know? What is that context, or about those people and events that you would most like to know to enhance the learning experience? One of the things that we're talking about with the college right now as part of their curriculum, new curriculum, is that a couple of pieces. If this was Chemistry 101 and it was populated and you had certain pieces and you set certain rights, that would never go away in theory. When you're a senior or a freshman, you still have that. So to some extent, part of this is that you're still connected to your Chemistry 101, freshman chemistry people, to the extent you choose to be. And it doesn't have to ever go away. Now, if you're in a freshman curriculum where you want to take different disciplines and mix and match things together, you can imagine that you have, you know, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, chemistry 3, all different pieces, or maybe better yet, you have chemistry, psychology, and biology or something. But now when you go to the next course, you get your next piece, and you can start to know who you might have already been in class with. You can start to know that people in your study group are really in this piece and they bring this type of expertise. Those are just kind of little examples of what this type of technology can do. A couple of things that we've only done as prototypes to demonstrate that is I could go over here to Willie, do a right click, and directly open a SIP conversation with him. Or I could open an IM session with him. I'm not going to do that right now, but just like that, you could do that. It knows the context, and it'll let it go through based on all sorts of preferences. You could do, in this case, email, but it could be again, part of the challenge here is think, what is it that you want? You know, how could we take this and what would you want if you're in an environment or all around the table to facilitate that and get a learning community and start making connections? So those things are working today, and we're looking to expand them. And of course, I can go off and look at anybody else here in this case. And right now, I'm going to look at Mike Conway, and he's in room 113. All right. Now, I just wanted to show that right now. Let's put a map on it, and again, you can go off and, you know, tie this to just virtually anything that's out in the web that might be related. And in this case, what I'm going to do now, since we know Mike's in room 113, that's different than 102, obviously, where I'm at. So I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log in. In this case, it's Mike. That's not what I want. It's Kevin Conway. And I'm going to sign in as him. Now, in this case, he's seeing all the same information, but from a different perspective. All right. So if you clicked on me, in this case, he could see that I'm still in room 102 and pieces. And as we move around, that would change. All right. And we're all getting our unique personal preference and perspective on context. Now, the only piece I wanted to show you here that was different was this room was a little bit smarter. All right. Well, actually, it's different. It does not have the micro view because it wasn't that smart or didn't have that type of capability, so it couldn't find it in this room. 103 doesn't have that, so it didn't find it. In the other room, it did have it, so it found it for you. You didn't do anything. And in this case, it's found these other pieces. And what happens is that these can become now very, very smart. In this case, it found the thermostat for room 113, or it could be the room we're in now. And the idea here is that without having to do anything, I can click on the thermostat. No, I have control of the thermostat. I can set that thermostat and do anything I want to with it. We could have, yeah, we could have thermostat wars. And again, it's not that we care about the thermostat, but I think it's a real clear example of how you reach out and touch things in a much more pervasive way than you could otherwise that we don't even think about now. And one of the things I'm going to do within ITS is we're going to take one of the Dan's senior conference rooms where all the ABCs and stuff meet, and we're going to have thermostat wars. We're going to look at different ways to adjudicate that. And you can start to imagine hundreds of them. I mean, there's lots of ways. It could be the first person in gets control. It could be whoever called the meeting gets control. It could do a voting. It could be all sorts of things because it's smart enough to do what you want it to do. Does that make sense? Question? Or
I just have one question.
Yeah.
You were playing with room 214 Betty Hall.
No. Not as far as you know. So that was that.
It made me think about, when I worked at the Schomburg sometimes, we used to have a TV in the lunchroom, and people used to fight over one channel, put it on, we have a TV in here, remote censoring. Everyone has questions.
Yeah.
it by jammers, right? You can turn off like those annoying CNN things in airports or, I mean, I can just see students sort of buying all sorts of different things to,
Well, the thing is, students are going to bring all sorts of things. These things are going to start talking. One of the things I really want to emphasize, though, is that
turn off.
when I, in this case, Mike Conley, when he walked into that room, he didn't do anything. All right? All he did was open his context browser, and his agent was monitoring him, discovered where he was, went out and looked proactively to find out what's around him and who's around him, and created all this dynamically based on the fact that he's in 113 and this is the context and what's going on around him in 113. All right, and in that case, we've got the AMX here. I don't have that one running at the moment, but what that means when we complete the AMX wrappers here on the network is that when you walk in here, and I have to confess, it took me 10 or 15 minutes to get connected correctly and know what switches to do and everything. But in the future, you'll walk in, and we're going to make this work. We're going to put this in the college. We may put it other places. You'll walk in, your agent will know where you are. It'll find this, and it'll give you control and connect you without you doing a thing. You don't plug anything in. You don't do anything. You just turn your device on. It finds it, and it gives you whatever control you want. All right, so you don't have to, in the same way today that basically you walk around, you don't have to find the wireless network. Okay? It will, in the same way, find the projector or the AMX and allow you to do what you want to with it.
John, we're getting ready to build a new building.
Mhm.
2 years or so out. What would it require
Congratulations.
for us to put equipment into the rooms to be able to sense people? What would people have to wear? ID tags? What would be required?
Okay, that's a good question, because I'm basically kind of at the end of this. There are part of context. One of the simplest things when you think about context is you can think about where am I? I mean, that's location-based services. And there's a lot of things that we're doing with that I'm not even touching right now. But the first thing is you have to know, where the heck am I? There are at least a dozen different technologies coming online at various speeds that will allow you to do that. So let me just pick through a few of them. One is you could have Wi-Fi triangulation, all right? So that you have any device that has a Wi-Fi, doesn't have to have a connection. All it has to do is be able, in this point, even if you're out of range in terms of being able to make a connection or you're not authorized, the location of all the antennas, the access points, are mapped, and you can now, by time of arrival and by just a program running on your device, it will be able to reach out, triangulate, and tell you, oh, I'm in room, 113 or 208. So there's Wi-Fi triangulation. There's of course GPS. There's other technologies like ultra-wideband, where you might be wearing a particular device, a key fob, for example. All right, that could be identified and identify you. It could be as simple as a Bluetooth beacon. There could be a Bluetooth beacon tuned for this room, and when I walk in, I catch it, it catches me, and now I know where I am. It could be more sophisticated on the micro type of levels, where you put an RFID tag under the table. So when you sit down and put your phone on it, or your laptop, or your Palm, or whatever it might be, it reads that through the table, and now it knows not only that you're in this room, but you're at that exact chair. And now, depending on the preferences and what you're doing, you can start to share and develop a whole new range of applications. So I could go on, but there's lots and lots of ways like that to determine that location. And they're not something that takes generally special infrastructure, because there's no wires. This network happens, this thermostat is a real thermostat, and it's back there in room 103, okay? And I can actually manipulate it right now live, all right? But it doesn't have to be hardwired. In the future, that'll be just a box. Your thermostat won't connect to anything, because it'll all be wireless. So it'll just be stuck on the wall, and you can do what you want to with it. again, so there's no special infrastructure. And actually, in the future, to some extent, you don't even need to have the thermostat at all. All you need to do is have a marker that says, this is the device out in the internet that controls the temperature for this room. And so when you come in the room, you discover that, then you go out and touch it wherever it is.
So part of the reason behind my question was, there's two ways. Maybe the system captures your identity and figures it out, or maybe you have a device or something that helps figure that out. Maybe my laptop figures out the wireless translation. And that has different implications as far as the personal sort of security of the data and stuff like that. So I might have some control. It's my device that's making the decision whether to say I'm there or not versus the system always recognizing me and things like
Yeah,
that.
that's a great question. And there are different ways about what processing goes on where to ensure different levels of privacy and security. All right. One of the models we're using now is that your device is the first thing that learns of something typically. All right, so it's the first thing that when I come in here, the room doesn't directly sense me. All right, although some of those ultra wideband and the Bluetooth stuff, that happens. All right, if you're using an RFID tag, that's my computer with touching the RFID tag and bringing the RFID tag back to me. You could intercept that any way you want to. It doesn't matter. That tag is not private. Doesn't contain private information. Yeah.
Yeah. For the advanced internet class, our group implemented an RFID tagging system to create an ephemeral social network within the classroom.
Yep.
And we used the Ruby on Rails to make a database
Cool.
that could find correlations between the students in the classroom and display those. And
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
We'd like to talk to you.
Yeah, it worked quite nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really exciting. That's some of the stuff that we want to do. We don't have all those, but we do have ways. We do have APIs or applets, so to speak, that can go out and farm information from your Facebook. It can go off and read your calendar or anybody else's calendar and start to do the same thing.
Yeah, the thing I'm wondering is, you know, there's a lot of emphasis here on the physicality. I was just, you know, in Second Life this morning talking to a librarian from Michigan, Australia, Rhode Island, and Vermont, real time. And Michigan Library Consortium has just had their first public lecture that I attended last Thursday, where there were over 100 librarians from all over the world attending this lecture. We could have your lecture right now, live streamed to Second World, and there could be avatars listening to you.
Absolutely.
And 10 times the number in this room, quite
Oh, yeah.
easily. And that technology is in place. And the thing that's really exciting is that they just announced they're going open source. You could have a virtual UNC on a grid computer.
I agree with everything you're saying. And all those are things that we're working on. By the way, we are getting ready to, I don't want to commit to this now because I'm on tape, but I'll say it anyway. We are planning to take a lot of this and put it out as open source. And we're going to put it out as SDKs. So you could have a location-based service SDK where you can start to take any application that you are, any application you can deliver through a web service, you can now tailor and customize without having all the infrastructure, because there'd be a generic infrastructure and a piece of middleware that would do all that for you. And so there's a bunch of those different types of things that we're going to roll out, and hopefully make, you know, the idea is various schools that are more progressive and departments and stuff will be able to take those and jump way ahead, big quantum leaps ahead.
I think the other follow on, was it Larry's comment or whatever, but in Second Life, your avatar, you know exactly the positions. It actually gets around a lot of the problems that we have in figuring out where you are and what's going on, because you know the person that can control their identity and how much is given out, and you always know the locations. It actually makes this job easier in things like Second Life. So
Yeah, part of the, I don't mean to be focusing on location per se, because location is just a small piece of your context, or being context awareness. It's the piece that everybody intuitively understands. Oh, I'm here, I'm there. As opposed to, you know, I'm studying. That's another type of context, and it's a little harder to deduce, but you can start to do that as the environment gets richer and richer. All those things are possible.
I'm just curious, I mean, you brought up the case of, you know, could somebody subpoena my minutes, you know, right? And just to be provocative back to you, by one interpretation, every single thing that's being created here is an electronic transaction that leaves a record behind. And I'm wondering what kinds of laws you have. This is a university that's a state institution, right? Which arguably means these are all state records. How do you make the decisions, do you think, about which of these things actually should be retained, right? That someone was in a particular location. I now didn't control the thermostat, I controlled some device that actually has pretty big implications.
It's an
How do
excellent
we make
question.
these architectural decisions about what actually gets kept of all this contextual data?
That's why we need to look at these things now to develop a basic understanding and appreciation for what the policy issues even are. I don't know how to answer that, and it's not going to be any one person. But until we start to understand it and the richness of it, we won't be able to develop the appropriate policies and decide. So one of the reasons why I think it's important that we start to push this and experiment with it and implement it in living lab environments is so we can become acquainted with those pieces and know how they may or may not impact us, what is important or not. I'm going to get you next. And for example, one of the things today is that a couple of examples, which I think there's different versions of that. I want to implement facial recognition in our new building over the doorways. It's an opt-in. So basically, whenever you walk up to particular doors that are locked, because it'll be a secure building, it's not a public access building, it'll open the door for you to recognize it. All right? Now, is that good or bad? Well, it'd be pretty cool. I'd rather not have to worry about anything and just walk through the door and I know it's secure. But is that Big Brother? Who owns that information? I don't know. But what it does do, and one of the reasons I want to do it, is because it highlights different ways to think about it. Today we think of facial recognition as inherently evil because it's that thing at the airport that's tracking me or that's doing something for me. It doesn't have to be that way. You can do all sorts of other things for you. It could be facial recognition and those types of technologies are now are on the verge of being capable of interpreting gestures and facial expressions to make deductions and inferences that are quite good about your mood, which is also part of your larger context. Matter of fact, now you're going to have to stop me, but I'll tell one more example about that I think was kind of telling about the whole issue. One of the people who are driving voice recognition as an industry is Detroit, because of all the automobiles. I mean, if you start to listen to the commercials now, they're all smart and smart and smart, and if you listen to the analysts, they're pouring technology into the cars. Well, one of the things they were, somebody, I think this was a faculty member at MIT, were researching how to do voice control and different pieces of it. And part of it was mood recognition. And the idea was that what they did was they had a little video camera on your visor that would look at you, and first of all it would just read your lips. Not that it knew what you were saying, but now it knew you were the one talking that matched up to that voice it heard. So it would give the control to the driver instead of the guy in the back. All right, just an interesting piece of trivia. But what they did, which was another experiment about mood and how to adapt and context, was, in a nutshell, let me see how to explain this. They took two groups and they had no, they didn't take two groups. Anyway, they had a kind of a happy voice interface recognition, and they had a surly voice piece, and they had a camera that could look at you and deduce from your facial expressions and stuff if you were in a good mood or a surly mood. All right? And then what they did was they gave that and they did different pieces and had the system respond to you in various ways. It turned out that if you were in a good mood with the happy voice, you were overall a better driver. If you were in a surly mood, with the surly voice, you also were a better driver. But if the voice was mixed was mismatched with your mood, you became a worse driver. And I don't know why I got onto that, but I thought it was interesting. That's all part of context, though, that's coming. When right now, that was my way of saying, it's not just where you are. The world of context is going to grow exponentially very fast.
I just wanted to follow up on what Cal said about this issue about records. I see real issues of authenticity because this is predicated on you actually connecting, like right now, actually connecting to this system. So you could be there but not recorded as being there unless we decide to, you know, go the other way, in which we have no choice but to be connected with the system, which seems to be kind of contradictory to, you know, kind of what we think about in this culture about choice and our choice in our society to participate or not. And so I just think that is also kind of an issue in terms of what, is it really a record of what happened, or is it just a record of who wanted to be recorded as what happened?
Like I said, these things are rich with all sorts of policy issues of which you're just starting to scratch the surface on, all of which are just excellent questions. I don't know the answers to them, but I do know that the only way we're going to get reasonable answers to them without being knee-jerk reactions is to start to look at them now so we have enough time to understand them over several years before we really jump in and have to make a knee-jerk reaction because some student brought it in from home. So those are all good questions, and I don't know. I don't even want to try to answer it. I could speculate and I could make my own opinion, but that doesn't matter.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that there's a lot of encryption technology that's being developed for things like RFID chips that are like U.S. passports now. And I know that you know, the Speed Pass system that they use at the Exxon stations was recently hacked. But those are getting better and better, and I think that through encryption, a lot of this information can be kept private.
I'll make a comment on that, and that is, it is right now in the scientific community or the computer science community, it is still debatable if you can make that secure or not. All right, and it seems like no matter what they do, somebody hacks it all the time. One of the ways we've addressed that issue is today the reason there are business considerations driving a lot about how people view these. And today, for example, on your cell phone, they're really locked down. So any service you want, virtually, you're paying somehow for that. You can't do anything that that company more or less won't allow you to do, whether it's connect to the internet, make a voice call, get a data connection, you know, whatever it is. All right. And that's all because they have control. The idea here of the passports is you have a tag that's on your passport, and you have a reader over here, and now you're giving your information to the reader, and that's now subject to being intercepted. All right. And the things that we're doing, and there might be a role for that type of piece in the larger environment. What we're doing now, though, is we're turning that around. We're saying, wait a minute, in this type of a community, we can do a lot more if we give the individual the reader. You know, they're exceptionally small and getting nothing but smaller. So we have laptops today and other Trio type devices that can do what we call touch services. And the idea is that one of them was in that room. You just touch the table, it read it. Now your device and only your device knows where you are. Anybody else could have intercepted that, and they don't know anything about you. All they know is the same thing I know about the tag. Now my agent goes off and starts to do something with that, so I'm in complete control, 100%. No chance of that. Now the only way that information can start to get stolen or manipulated in some evil way by an outsider is whatever happens on the network. Now that's no different than what happens today, though. And if you're going to go into a private application or your bank or whatever it is, it just means that in the same way that you have an ID and password today, you would have it there. So with my phone, I'd have a touch interface that asks me for my PIN, and I'd say it's, you know, whatever. And I'm going just as if I was from home. It doesn't matter. So in that, though, one of the things we do, so anyway, I think if you have your own reader, there's two things. One is they're very cheap, and I'm kind of predicting that the industry is going to start changing this model, and you'll have the reader with you, whether it's in your phone or anything else. Now, it makes it really, really easy to roll out services, and this is where I think the phone companies have adopted the other model, because now, if you want to roll out a location-based service, all you need to do is print a tag that says this, you know, if you do this, you can get this service. And we have actually an RFID tag printer, and we can tell it to do whatever. So one of the services we have right now, which I think is really cool, might be something to think about in Sills, is we tag all of our printers. All right, and it just has a little tag. This is, you know, printer, it could be empty, it doesn't have to say anything. All right, and now I can take my PC or my portable device and I can touch the printer. My computer now knows what printer that is, and it can go out and automatically configure itself, and now that's my default printer and I can print whatever I want. It's very cool. You know, I can walk around the building or different places and touch whatever I want, and I get that print service. I don't do a thing, just touch. I could also, and we have these applications working today as well, but you can now put a tag on the door that you touch, and it says that tag is for the calendar for the room. You know, I don't do anything, I don't have to know anything, I just touch it, and the tag says schedule. You don't post anything on the door or anything else. It goes off to the event calendar or whatever calendar you're already using. And we're now farming information off the campus event calendar and doing mock-ups on, well, mock-ups isn't the right idea, doing, using the campus Oracle calendar, but it could just as well be Excel, and we're actually writing some software to do that. And now you can get calendar information from anywhere just by touching. You could have one too that was on the table or on your desk or as you walk through that gave you the, as a student, might give you the syllabus of the day. You know, daily syllabus. Now you might want to do that differently. You might just, you know, when you sat down, but depending on the piece, now you can start to imagine doing anything. You could go up to the student union when you have a kiosk now. Instead of having all the flyers and trying to tell you what to do, you could look at all the flyers, but all the flyers would have an RFID tag on it. Anything you're interested in, oh, touch it, and it's going to pop up what you need to know or what you might want to know, or, you know, start you on your way. And those become very easy now because the tag in the service, basically whatever the tag is going to tell you, to go off and access this web service in the simplest sense. In that case, now you can deliver any web service you want anywhere, tailored to that location. And we've got 2 minutes.
John,
But
based
feel
on
free.
your experience, you guys have looked at a lot of these technologies and thought about some of these policies. You've got a lot of bright students here. What would be the 2 or 3 maybe near-term things that you think are going to be impacting us that the students might want to think about as far as policies or technologies that they're going to attack some of these problems? What are things that are going to be happening and crucial in the next 2-3 years?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think part of the dilemma is there's too many things to look at. So let me make just a couple indirect comments and then try to do it. One is, one of the conclusions I come to is that information science as a discipline and as something that's going to contribute to this is going, the importance of that is going to grow exponentially, because how do you access, save, store, retrieve, all these things are now going to grow in complexity exponentially. All right, so information science in general is going to become increasingly important, in the same way that, 20 years ago computer science kind of shot up. I think information science is going to do the same thing, over a period of time here in the future. Not the next couple of years, but, if I was younger and thinking about a future, you could think, computer science is still one of those kind of hot things for people, because all the people in information science will be too. Now, what do you think about the next 2 or 3 years? Gee, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is to start thinking about policy. You know, and a lot of the old policy thinking is going to change. It's going to have to change a lot. For example, we, all of us, are, and people in general, are very inconsistent with how we deal with privacy, even individually. And one of the good examples is that to take this video today, the ethic was felt obligated to ask me. All right? And I said, sure. However, there are classrooms and companies today making a viable living selling classroom capture systems. All right? And I don't think people require any approval from the students. So while in this case there's a ethic that says you can't film me, but on the other hand, if I want to have that in my classroom, you guys have no choice. You know, that's a policy issue, but looking at it from different perspectives. And when you get your mimics and different pieces and sensors now, that can become very, very complex. And we're going to need a new way to think about it.
Well, when is this new campus going to roll out?
Well, one of the things is I'm trying to do things that we're looking 5 to 10 years ahead. 5 to 7 years kind of is what we're trying to look at ahead. And in that case, that's kind of the early warning horizon, so to speak, that we're looking at, where things are real enough that we can take things out of the lab and early implementations in industry and start to apply them to the university environment, to whatever makes us unique in situations. And in that case, try to make them about classrooms, for example, or learning communities, which I think is full of extraordinary opportunities. Which means it's not going to roll out all at once. And what it means is that we are trying to roll out things that we think are interesting, and they will roll out piece by piece, and people will adopt them. They're non-trivial. I mean, you can't. I mean, I'm not going to say this is really complicated. We are going to try to put out a bunch of SDKs that will allow various parts of this, but it still takes effort. And part of the challenge today, from my perspective, and one of the things that I want to get people thinking about is that today, if a faculty member might do this, but in general, for the IT people to experiment with this at all, or kind of say we ought to be doing this, would be kind of heresy. You know, it just wouldn't fly. It's like, well, wait a minute, I want you to fix my printer. I don't care about any of this stuff. So one of my messages is to say, well, we do need to do that. We do need to change how we think about it, because it's coming quite a bit faster, and we have to start learning about it now.
Well, John, thank you very much for a very stimulating and engaging talk today. I'm sure if you've got further questions or follow-ups, maybe you can hang around for a few minutes.
Yep, no problem.